An admissions committee may well look at this and say, well, this person doesn't really have enough experience to really know anything about what they're getting into other than the eye.
This is Am I Ready? Technically episode 2, because episode 1 we did on National Premed Day. Today we're going live again as part of our official launch day. Dr. Scott Wright, we are live with Mapped in a public beta, which is exciting.
Woohoo! Yeah. It's very exciting.
Dr. Wright, for those who don't know who you are at this point, which I'm ashamed if they don't, but that's okay. Many won't. Many still don't know who I am. Who are you? Where have you been? Who are you into this whole pre-med world?
Well, good. That's a good question. I am essentially the god of admissions. That's what I am. A deity beyond any others. No, I'm kidding. My background is in medical education. I was started in the world of medicine, medical education, back in the 90s as director of admissions at the University of Texas Southwestern Medical School in Dallas, where I ran the admissions committee process, interviews, selecting students for interviews, the admissions committee meetings themselves, and notifying students of their offers, et cetera. So the entire process.
Yeah.
For 10 years, I did that and learned a lot about what makes a successful applicant. Shortly thereafter, I went from the UT Southwestern Med School to be Associate Dean and Director of the Health Professions Advising Center at the University of Texas at Dallas, undergraduate institution where I was on the other side of the spectrum, where I was working with pre-med students as well as other health professions, but specific to this, where we are now, pre-med students, where we advocated for them, helped them along the pathway to having strong applications to enter medical schools. We typically had somewhere each year between 200 and 300 applicants to medicine. And so a large applicant pool each year where we advocated for them, helped them along the way. Then in 2012, I went as executive director of the Texas Application Service, where I had spent the last 8 years until recently, in the middle of the process, helping both students on the application side of things as well as the medical schools on their side of things, and connecting the two. We did a lot of work over those years with making information more accessible, making the application process a more user-friendly experience for applicants. And I hope that comes through to those students that are applying to TMDAS, that unlike some of the other application services, no names mentioned, it's like going into a big black hole where you can't, you never hear back or whatever.
Ouch.
So,
yeah.
But anyway,
so you've been around the block.
Been around the block several times.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, it's a blessing to have you on the MAP team, and we're excited to share your wisdom today with Am I Ready? So for those of you watching live, for those of you listening to the podcast in the future, Am I Ready is kind of, if you've seen my series Application Renovation, Am I Ready is the other side of it. So application renovation is you applied, you didn't get in, let's figure out why. Now we're going to look at students who haven't applied yet, look at where they're at, and really give them feedback on whether they're ready to apply or not, or potentially what they should be doing to improve their application. So with that said, why don't we jump into our first one here? We have a student from UC Irvine. And so this is a fun day for us, right? Mapped is live. And so these students are in Mapped. They're using Mapped. They have all of their information in Mapped, and we'll be able to see that. So right off the bat, we just see, right, UC Irvine as the only school they've gone to. You can see the MCAT test date somewhere in 2020, which is interesting, but a start date of 2022. that raises a little bit of a red flag for me. What do you think about that?
Yeah, this sounds like, just from my first experience with this application, it sounds like a what we might call in the medical education world a gunner who is on fast track, and perhaps he or she has just finished their prereqs, and they want to really hit the MCAT right after they've finished those up. So I don't know that it raises a red flag. It's certainly interesting to me. I would say, how the MCAT turns out would be the most important question. I don't know when this person, I guess we'll find out later when they are planning to take the MCAT actually. So
the thing that I think about when I see this is, if they don't get in here, their MCAT's going to expire much quicker, and they're more at risk. So that's one of the issues with applying or taking the MCAT that early. So
good point.
So we have our dashboard. So in MAP, this is our dashboard that we can kind of at a glance see what's going on with the student. And so I'll zoom in here. I think I'll try to zoom in. There's something weird with it's not liking my gesture inputs. Anyway, I'll leave it there. You can see the AMCAS graph barely.
The dark blue graph. The dark blue line.
This one here. So this graph here, and you can see this dark blue line is the cumulative GPA here. Nice big dip. I mean, not really nice, but a nice big dip here, spring 18-19. And you can see that the graph actually is scaled, so it looks like a huge dip, and that obviously needs to be adjusted a little bit because it bottoms out at 3.84. Right, that's not a bad dip.
No.
And so the student obviously has done very well GPA wise, 3.9 cumulative, 3.9 science GPA.
Right.
Looking pretty solid.
Yep.
Activity hours here, 2,200 activity hours. Awesome. Let's see what that breakdown is though. When you look at total hours, this biggest one here looks like research, and we'll dive into the activities a little bit more. Highest MCAT so far. This is interesting. So the student, again, you mentioned gunner a little bit. I'm like, why is a student so far away from applying to medical school already taking the MCAT? But that's interesting. And obviously rocking it. They're a good student all around. So lots of good stuff here. They're on their way prereq-wise to be ready for medical school as well. So at a glance, this looks pretty solid. Yep. Would you agree?
So far, so good.
So far, so good. So we have paid employment.
It's a scientific internship, he says.
So internship. So paid employment internship. That is, looks like ongoing.
Yeah.
Oh, it's not even going to let me do that. All right. Let's try that. All right. Research. So the internship is from July 1919. All right. So these are in order of date. We should have name. We should have done date. That's all right. So a little bit older. That's fine. Internship. Lots of hours. Research here. A little bit older. Lots of hours. Project Rishi. Interesting. So it's a club. A little bit older. Extracurricular activities, a retina analyzer. Interesting. Don't know what that is. Rotaract, another club. Some shadowing. Great. A little bit older. So this is interesting. They have Monday. This is probably just an entry error. Shadowing 50 hours in one day. Probably not not there, but
a little impossible.
That's all right. Some more research, 250 hours, some extracurricular activities, some volunteering, 100 hours, and this is in the future and a little bit older.
Yeah.
I'm missing something here. What are you missing?
So I'm missing clinical experience.
Me too.
And I think that the shadowing, I think we're going to get to another screen in a bit where he talks about that this is an ophthalmologist that he or she is shadowing.
Yeah.
and they're real committed to this idea of ophthalmology. And so I think that my big concern here is the lack of clinical experience. A lot of research, a little bit of shadowing with one type of physician, and no clinical experience where they get real, good, strong patient interaction or contact. This concerns me because my feeling is, particularly knowing that that later on they talk so much about how they want to be an ophthalmologist, it can easily come across as too focused or somewhat naive. Does the student really understand what medical school is? Medical school doesn't train ophthalmologists.
Yep.
It trains generalists, and then you choose to go into whatever. This student, an admissions committee may well look at this and say, well, this person doesn't really have enough experience to really know anything about what they're getting into other than the eye. And that concerns me.
Yeah. And part of the question that I would ask, all right, if this was me, was, are they going to enjoy this whole process where you have to go through pediatrics, internal medicine, OBGYN, psychiatry, knowing that you're super interested in ophthalmology, which isn't bad, right? We're not saying you shouldn't be interested in something, but when the goal of getting into medical school is understand what this whole process is and hopefully show passion for the whole process, not just I'm only focused on the end goal, right? And I fell prey to that with knowing full well I wanted to be an orthopedic surgeon. That was the only reason I applied to medical school, was to be an orthopedic surgeon. And when it came time to actually being in medical school and having our first block of classes, which was histology and anatomy and physiology, my focus was 1,000% on anatomy in the cadaver lab, because histology has nothing to do with orthopedics, right? I'm like, I don't need to know that. That's a waste of time. And I failed my first test because I paid no attention to it. And so you really need to, again, it's fine to have these interests, but the goal of applying to medical school isn't to show that you want to be an ophthalmologist. It's to show why you want to be a physician. So really honing in on that.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. So again, tons of hours we saw, and that's where, right, you look at SDN or Reddit and students are like, I have thousands of hours of this and that, and I didn't get into medical school. I'm like, well, let's make sure you were focusing on the right thing. So
the important stuff. Exactly.
Yeah, so some potential issues there with
contact
those
hours.
Contact hours. All right, so moving a little bit further on in this, we have that one practice MCAT score that the student showed us. Obviously, crushing. Looks like the AAMC sample test. So it was the unscored sample test. 129, 130, 129, 130. Obviously, great scores. It's the unscored one, which a lot of people think that's an actual score, but just be careful because that's the unscored one that doesn't have all the data behind it.
Right.
And I know there are conversion tables and stuff on SDN and Reddit, but the AAMC has it unscored for a reason.
Yeah.
But that's a pretty solid start, I would say.
Yeah. No, I think so too. I think I think the student needs to be careful and really work hard at performing well on the MCAT to match with a good, strong GPA. So, yeah.
Yep. All right. And then inside of Mapped, you can build a school list. So we can see that here. The student obviously looks like they're potentially a California resident, having gone to UC Irvine. So looks like they added all of most of the California schools there, which is good. That's okay. Again, school list here, just more of the same. This time, some of the East Coast schools: Hopkins, Harvard, Michigan, Columbia, Cornell, Duke, Case Western, and Perelman at Penn.
Yeah, a lot of the great schools.
All really good schools, right? And with the 3.9, 518, assuming that's going to be his final MCAT, right? If we want to project out, he's competitive stat wise.
Yeah. I mean, I think that I'll go back to what I said earlier. This is and I don't mean gunner in a pejorative way. I mean it to say this is a really smart student who is really focused and on what they're doing. They may well have finished high school early and they're rocking it through college, and probably did well in the SAT, and now is going on the MCAT. So I don't, I think the subset of schools that they have really selected, a lot of the California schools, makes a lot of sense if indeed they're a California resident, and then focusing on, the schools that they're really interested in. Clearly, this student is interested in the top East Coast schools, and add to that Michigan, which is obviously a great medical school as well. So I think these are what I would put in the subset of sort of the dream schools that they're really focusing on, and has the schools in California, which are maybe a more safer bet. Some of them are a little, top med schools in the country as well. UCSF, for example, in San Diego and Stanford. Absolutely. I don't think that they're off target on the type of schools they're applying to. The big question mark is going to be the MCAT, and the research experience that they have. A lot of the schools that this student has indicated are research heavy institutions. So that would make sense. I think pairing that with a good degree of some clinical work over the next year or so would really put together a nice application.
Yeah, I want to correct something that I mentioned earlier. One of my concerns about the gap between taking the MCAT and applying, that early date that we saw, 2022, that's when the student wants to start medical school, meaning they're applying 2021. And here on this screen, they're saying they're hoping to take the MCAT later this year, which makes sense. There are a handful of students, a percentage of students, who take the MCAT late the year before they apply. And so the MCAT timing here is perfectly fine. I was worried about like expiring, but I had the application versus starting medical school year switched in my head. So some supplemental info about activities. The student says they've shadowed several ophthalmologists. This is what you were talking about earlier, before the pandemic, and I'm doing virtual shadowing now, which is fine. Again, right? That's the only thing available for most students. So it is what it is. Better than nothing. I have some scribing and hospice work lined up. All right, so there's some clinical experience, right?
There you go.
For you as a former director of admissions, this is very common, especially for students who really focus on those grades, who are focused on research. That it seems like they're like, okay, application is coming up. Oh shoot, I need to check off a couple more boxes. Let me cram in some scribing and some hospice stuff.
Right.
Does that look good, or should a student like this, kind of we're getting into the am I ready part, should a student like this delay a year knowing that they need to get some more clinical experience under their belt? And not necessarily from a total hours perspective, right? But from a can you really like internalize the experience in 3 months to then turn around and go, here's why I want to be a doctor for the rest of my life?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think in this case, if this was a normal year,
yep.
Then I would say the student has plenty of time. This student has the entirety of their fall semester, the winter break, as well as the entirety of their spring semester. So fall, winter break, spring, basically an academic year, to get those clinical experiences and to really reflect on them and do some heavy lifting in terms of evaluating what's this all about. So I think there's plenty of time. Now the problem is this isn't a normal year.
You don't say.
This is a COVID year, and so the ability for the student to get anything this fall, I would suspect, is going to be pretty limited, if not nearly impossible, to get real direct clinical experience. Now, depending on how things go and what he or she is able to do, then I think that maybe it'll work out, and maybe they can find something where they're able to do scribing remotely, or maybe they're able to do scribing that if they're in California. California is experiencing a big uptick in COVID cases and stuff. So my suspicion is there's going to be some difficulties here. What's going to happen next spring? Hard to know. Based on all of our expectations, we would have thought we'd have been over this long before now anyway. So I would say that my concern here is if they're not able to get some pretty substantial clinical experience over this academic year, then I wouldn't probably suggest a gap year or a delayed year. I would say go ahead and apply, but recognize that this is a weakness of your application, and that it may not do well in some of the schools that you're applying to, depending on kind of their take on the lack of clinical experience, and see what happens. You can always reapply the next year and use that intervening year to bolster those clinical experiences. So, I would say this is the kind of student. There's so many good parts of the application that I wouldn't necessarily recommend delaying application, but having in the back of their mind, okay, I know this is a weakness. If this is such a weakness that I don't get into any of these schools I've applied to, then I'll kind of know what the deal is and I'll be able to fix it in that intervening year.
What if they had zero shadowing experience as well? Would that be more of a you should just wait?
Yeah, that's even a bigger red flag. I think we on occasion would have students who had lots of research experience. Were applying to Southwestern, which is a research-heavy school, and didn't really have much to go on. That would depend on kind of the take of the committee and what their interview results were like, in terms of how the interviewer was able to explore that a little bit. But I would suspect there'd be some real questions about that if they had no experience whatsoever outside of the lab with anything medical. So
Okay. So a little bit more info that the student shared. I've always wanted to be a doctor and thought of doctors as the superheroes of the real world. How does that type of statement? I've seen lots of personal statements, lots of discussions where students put physicians up on a pedestal. That always concerns me.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts with that type of sentiment?
I think that it goes to the sort of naivete. And I think admissions committees expect some level of naivete with applicants, particularly with younger applicants, the sort of more traditional applicants who are 20, 21, 22 years old. Their life experience is typically somewhat limited. And then when you look deeper at this particular student and you see that they don't really have any any firsthand experience with physicians in a clinical setting to see the physicians making mistakes and getting mad at people and, you know, doing the things that kind of brings them down a few notches, then, you know, I think it could come across as probably more naive than perhaps typical.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
They continue, my own vision problems led me to explore optometry as a career, but I was a lot more drawn to the surgeries and more complex cases. All right. So kind of going to why they're so interested in ophthalmology, it's personal experience, right? They had their own vision problems.
Right.
Shadowing ophthalmologists has made me want to become a doctor even more, and I hope to gain more clinical experience in the coming months. So very, very common story there. Hey, look, I fixed the scrolling issue.
Nice.
All right.
You are the man.
Please list something you think will help you stand out as an applicant. I like to build stuff to help people, particularly apps and devices. While many of my projects end up failing or not working, I'm always working on something to help out where I can. Right now, I'm working on a COVID contact tracing app, as well as an ultrasound-based brain pressure diagnostic to help improve sport concussion protocols. Cool.
Wow. Yeah.
So,
I mean, my first reaction to this is never use the word stuff in your application. That would be a word that is probably a little bit too casual.
Yep.
And I even suggest that students avoid using the word things too often. Mm-hmm. While I like things, I like to do things, or things it doesn't mean anything. It's too general, too nebulous. Be more specific with your language.
Yeah. So we've come to the end of that student's kind of review inside of Mapped and some of the extra information. Red light, green light, Scott, on applying.
I'd say green light. I'd say, you know, all indications are he's going to do well on the MCAT. He's obviously a very strong student. He or she, I don't know what they are. They're obviously a great student in the classroom, smart, builds apps and stuff, and, you know, lots of research experience. Clearly, this is a smart kid. And so I would say a guarded green light, assuming that within the intervening year, this academic year, can get some good clinical experiences under the belt.
Yeah. I think I would agree. I'm a little bit more yellowish because of that lack of clinical experience. I've just seen it too many times. Amazing stat students. I would want to potentially have the student write a draft of a personal statement to see how they can materialize their thoughts on why they want to be a physician.
Right.
And if they're really, really, really struggling with that, then say, let's get a lot more clinical experience to make sure that this is what you want. So that along with that superhero comment, I'm like, are you really sure you understand what medicine is?
Right.
And I've seen some students like this who have a lot of that research background, who are builders and tinkerers, who really potentially want to get into like the device world, right? The device industry, but want to go to medical school to have that background before they do that. And this might be a student like that, and that's definitely okay. We need those types of people as well. So
and this is the kind of student too who, depending on the level of their experiences and stuff, I don't know if they've considered a dual MD PhD program, but you know, could potentially be a student that might consider that as an option. For particularly if they really like the research they're doing and seem to really connect with that.